For most of my early career, I believed that closing was a skill you developed through practice. That the more conversations you had, the better you got at handling objections, presenting value, and guiding someone from interest to commitment. And there is some truth in that. Experience in sales conversations does matter. But I was treating the close as the primary variable when it was actually one of the least important variables in the whole equation. The realization that changed everything for me was not about how to sell better. It was about understanding that by the time a prospect gets on a call with me, the outcome of that conversation has already been significantly shaped by everything that happened before it. The close rate I experienced in any given month was not a reflection of how well I sold that month. It was a reflection of the quality of the positioning and proof I had built in the months before. Close rate is not a sales problem. It is a pre-sales problem. The builders who close at the highest rates are not better at selling than everyone else. They are better at what happens before the conversation starts. By the time the right prospect gets on a call with them, the decision is already leaning one way. The conversation is not where the close happens. It is where the close gets confirmed. Everything that actually drives the close happened earlier, in the content, the positioning, the proof, and the reputation that arrived in the room before the builder did. I started tracking where my closed clients had first encountered me and what they had seen or read or heard before we ever spoke. The pattern was consistent. The clients who closed fastest and with the least friction were almost always the ones who had been following my work for some time before reaching out. They were not evaluating me when we got on the call. They had already evaluated me. The call was just the moment they decided to act on a conclusion they had already reached. The clients who required the most effort to close, who needed the most convincing and the most objection handling, were almost always the ones who had found me through a cold referral or a direct introduction with no prior contact. They were starting from zero trust. Every minute of that conversation was being spent building something that my best clients had already built themselves before they reached out. That asymmetry taught me something I should have understood much earlier. The quality of a sales conversation is largely predetermined by the quality of the relationship that exists before it. And the relationship before the conversation is built not in the conversation itself, but in every piece of content, every case study, every interaction, and every signal the prospect encountered before they ever reached out. The sale is not made in the meeting. It is made in the months of invisible work that preceded the meeting. Every sales conversation has a moment where the outcome is effectively decided, and it almost never happens when the price is presented or the objection is raised. It happens earlier, quietly, when the prospect makes an instinctive assessment of whether you are the provider they were hoping to find. If that assessment lands yes, the rest of the conversation is logistics. If it lands no, the rest of the conversation is damage control. That assessment is not shaped by how well you sell. It is shaped by what the prospect already knew about you before they arrived. That is the thing worth investing in. Specificity closes more deals than persuasion does. When a prospect can see clearly that you have solved their exact problem before for someone who looks like them, in a context that resembles theirs, the decision to work with you stops being a leap of faith and becomes a logical conclusion. That specificity is not created in the sales conversation. It is created in everything that happens before it. The content you put out, the case studies you have built, the way you describe what you do, and who you do it for. The sale is won or lost long before the conversation starts. What this meant practically for me was shifting a significant portion of the attention I had been putting into improving my sales process, into improving what happened before the sales process. More specific positioning so that the people who found me already knew whether they were the right fit. More documented proof so that by the time we spoke, they had already seen evidence that the work produced results for people like them. More consistent content so that the people in my market had enough exposure to how I thought that by the time they reached out, they already trusted the perspective. What this meant, practically for me, was shifting a significant portion of the attention I had been putting into improving my sales process into improving what happened before the sales process. More specific positioning, so that the people who found me already knew whether they were the right fit. More documented proof, so that by the time we spoke, they had already seen evidence that the work produced results for people like them. More consistent content, so that the people in my market had enough exposure to how I thought that by the time they reached out, they already trusted the perspective. The close rate improved not because I got better at closing, but because the conversations I was having were starting from a fundamentally different place. The trust had been built before the conversation began. The proof had been seen before the price was discussed. The fit had been assessed before the call was scheduled. And when all of that is already in place, the close is not a moment of persuasion. It is a formality. That is the one thing that changes your close rate overnight. Not a new technique, not a better script. A recognition that the conversation is the end of the process, not the beginning of it, and that the real leverage is in everything that happens before the prospect ever picks up the phone. Next, we are going to look at something that surprises most builders when they first encounter it. Why small audiences convert better than large ones, and what that means for how you should be thinking about growth. I will see you tomorrow.